Thank you. Good morning. My name's Anthony Kelly. I'm the Engineering Design Manager at the Council. I'm joined here this morning with Paul Ambrose, who's our Flooding and Drainage Manager. We've been asked by Chair this morning to come forward to a short presentation on flooding in the localised area of Bournemouth. And obviously there'll be an opportunity for questions afterwards. We are also joined by Councillor David Smith, who's a portfolio holder looking after the flooding.
Can you just introduce yourself, who you are?
Sorry. Sorry.
Just done that.
I'll do it again. Sorry.
Talking to the microphone.
Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry. I'm Anthony Kirby. I'm the Engineering Design Manager at Bournemouth, and I'm joined by my colleague Paul Ambrose, who's the Flooding and Drainage Manager. At Bournemouth we have a relatively small team, as most local authorities of our size do, but we're very specialist and we do have a lot of local knowledge, so hopefully our presentation can give you an overview of the flooding issues nationally and locally, and then obviously there's an opportunity for questions, so thank you very much.
Can everybody hear me?
No.
Do you want the mic?
Oh, I hate talking into these things. Flooding is quite a technical issue. I know you're flooded. As far as you're concerned, it's dead simple. Water's coming into your property. But I think you need to sort of try and understand sort of the legal and some of the technical details behind it. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to have to sort of go through this quite quickly. So I would ask if there's any questions, if we can take them at the end. And I admit, some of this might be a bit heavy going, but it's important to try and understand some of the legal and technical details behind the background, the background to this. So, first things first, flooding's not new. Well, okay. I don't know whether anybody remembers back in 2007, we had a horrendous winter. There was terrific flooding in Gloucester and all that, and the outcome of that was that government decided that they were going to carry out a big review, and there was a gentleman called Sir Michael Pitt. I don't know whether anybody's ever heard of him, but he was asked to do a big review on where we are with flooding and drainage, looking at the country as a whole. Actually, if you probably remember this, because this was the one where the water treatment works on the River Severn was actually completely flooded, and everybody had to start having bottled water. So I don't know if you actually remember, that was in the media. Anyway, so Michael Pitt was asked to look at flooding in this country, and the outcome of that was the Pitt review, which it's actually very readable. It's a fantastic piece of information, but out of that, so Michael Pitt looked at it and he basically came to the conclusion the whole thing was a complete mess. There was all sorts of flooding going on. Nobody knew who was responsible for what. It was a nightmare. People were being flooded. They didn't know who to speak to. The other thing that happened was that they were looking at the effect on the emergency services. So there was a huge review carried out, and he produced this report, and unusually for government, they actually responded very quickly and implemented almost all of Sir Michael Pitt's recommendations. So that then led onto some legislation. The other thing that happened was that government looked at where our major risks are, and you can see that nationally inland flooding does feature. It's quite likely, and it does have a major impact. So, as far as government is concerned, flooding is an important issue, and the outcome of that was two pieces of legislation: the flood risk regulations, and the more important one, the 2010 Floods and Water Management Act. Why was that important? Well, basically what they did was they looked at who was responsible, and when there was nobody responsible for something, they allocated responsibility to somebody. So now nearly all forms of flooding are somebody's responsibility. We'll come on to what responsibility means in a minute, because it's a slightly disingenuous title. Anyway, Main rivers, that's in our area, is the River Stour and the sea. That's the Environment Agency, and in actual fact it always has been the Environment Agency. Public sewers, both foul and surface water sewers, those are the responsibility of Wessex Water. In actual fact, the council used to be agents to Wessex Water, so in the old days we were actually looking after the drains and main sewers on behalf of Wessex Water, but that went back to Wessex Water in 1996. The council has not been responsible for the public sewers since 1996. Highways. We are the Highway Authority. Bournemouth Council is the Highway Authority since 1997, although before that we were agents to Dorset County. So we're responsible for the highway. The new one is surface runoff, groundwater and ordinary watercourses. And in this particular area, one of the main ones, the ordinary watercourse, is Kinson Stream. So that is new since 2010. That has become the responsibility of the council as the lead local flood authority. But don't forget, there's people here, you are responsible for your own drains on your own properties and your own soakaways. Also, landowners are responsible for draining their own land, things like ditches and any drains that they have on it. The Met Office is responsible for weather warnings, but nobody's responsible for the rain. Rain happens. And that's the thing to think about, is that rain, nobody is responsible. Rain happens, rain occurs, and water has always run off from higher land onto lower land, into a stream, into a river, and ends up down into the sea. That's always happened, and that always will happen. Okay, very briefly, we'll look at these other things. This is the sort of things that I was going to do quickly in the presentation. What's a flood? Why? Etc. Anyway, you can read that. That's a flood. That's what most people think of as flooding. That actually was Tewkesbury in 2007. That's one of the ones that Michael Pitt was looking at. That perhaps puts it in perspective from a national context. That's what we're talking about nationally when we're talking about flooding. Don't get that in Bournemouth, do we? We don't get the whole town centre completely underwater. No, we don't. But what we get are things like this. Now, I don't know whether anybody ever saw that. That was Boscombe Chine. We had a terrific, very localised downpour. All went down through Boscombe Chine. You can see the effect of that. That was Boscombe Chine in 1991. You've all seen the media, the lower gardens. The lower gardens floods regularly. That was the air show event, where we had just over 1.5 inches of rain in an hour, and you can see the consequences of what happened there. Some of the other flooding that we get locally, that was the mobile home, Iford Park. That was in 2002. Now that is flooding from the main river. So it's not, I know somebody here will disagree with me, but this is not primarily the Borough Council's responsibility from a flooding point of view. This is flooding from the main river. Again, terrific flooding of the home site in 2013. Leading on, the legislation, it's very, one man's flood is another man's puddle. I get lots of people tell me that the road is flooding. When I get out there, well, it's a big puddle. So poor old government thought, well, I know, let's define what a flood is. And you know, they got stumped. They really, really had great difficulty deciding what the flood was. And the definition that they've come up with is land that's not normally covered by water that becomes covered by water. Well, yeah, that's actually not very helpful, because for starters it says nothing about how deep it is, how long it occurs, what consequences of it. As far as government is concerned, that is the definition of a flood. A flood, that's some of the things that a flood is not. So what does the council have to do? Well, in fact, the council, under the Floods and Water Management Act, has a relatively small numbers of things that it has to do. It has to come up with a local flood risk management strategy. We've just finished that local flood risk, that has been out to consultation. The consultation has now closed, but it doesn't go to Cabinet until December. So if there really are any burning issues, I think this is the time to flag that up. But one of the things is, it doesn't have to solve flooding. Now this is where I said the wording of the legislation is quite disingenuous in some ways. It makes people responsible for something, but then doesn't say they have to solve it. One of the other things that we have to do is when we have a big flood, we have to go and investigate it and see if somebody didn't do something properly. Okay, that's Bournemouth, that's the area of Bournemouth. Very briefly, that's the area of the river, of the floodplain, River Stour floodplain. That information is available if anybody wants to go and look at it. It's on the EA website. That's been around for a very long time. What is the recognised floodplain in Bournemouth? Bournemouth, by and large, has been very good in not having developments in the floodplain. We've resisted pressure for all sorts of development in the floodplain. There are a small number of properties in the floodplain, but by and large, we've managed to avoid that sort of big flood risks like Tewkesbury, Gloucester, those sorts of places. Now, this is a bit heavy going. When it rains heavier than the water can soak into the ground, what happens to the water? Well, it just runs off the ground. If it's not soaking into the ground, it just runs off and it starts running downhill. Historically, over the years, new drains have been put in, and they were built to standards that were relevant at the time. And often some of the very old pipes in this country, they actually weren't built to any... They were built rules of thumb. Engineers had come up with good rules of thumb. But some of those drains are over 100 years old. There is no requirement to go back. If somebody's put the drain in the roads 20 years ago, and then the road wider or whatever, there's no requirement to go back and make those sewers bigger. Now, one little footnote on that. There's something called the Director General Register, and Wessex Water have they're tasked to remove properties from the DG5 register. So people that have flooded from the sewers, if they have reported it to Wessex Water and they're on what's called the DG5 register, Wessex Water are tasked to remove properties from the DG5 register, but only where it's cost effective to do so. Also in planning, if a big new development comes along and it can be shown that the drains are inadequate, then that can get fed into the planning process. But there's no automatic process for looking at the sewers for new developments. If we have exceptional rain, the law doesn't say you have to make drains to be able to cope with everything. The law recognises that at some stage you're going to get rainfall that's heavy enough that it's going to beat the local drainage capacity. There's no legislation in this country that says any drain has to cope with every rainfall event. The law recognises that you are going to get some rainfall events that are so extreme that they are outside the normal design parameters. So, if we get rain that's more than the drains can cope with or the land can soak up, where's it going to go? Where would you start trying to work out where this water is going to go? Well, this was some of the things that were considered in 2008. And just here's a useless fact for you. An inch of rain over Bournemouth is equivalent to 125 million toilet flushes. Why is this relevant? Well, lots of people keep saying to me, oh, it's all this new development that's occurring. Yes, that does have an influence, but the major thing is rain. That's what causes the floods. And that, an inch of rain over Bournemouth creates an awful lot of water, and it's got to go somewhere. So where do we start? Well, one of the first things we've got is what's called LIDAR data. Now, this is picked up by an aeroplane flying over, and it shoots a laser beam down to the ground, and it bounces it back up. And the aeroplane measures that distance, and they know how high the aeroplane is, so they can actually develop what's called a surface of Bournemouth. Now, this is what Bournemouth would look like, the contours of Bournemouth, without any buildings, roads, anything. And most people have probably never even noticed this or thought about it, but some of the things to point out. First of all, this valley here, that's the Bourne Stream. This valley here, that's Boscombe Chine. This huge valley here, oh, not quite sure what that is. I don't recall seeing that. It starts up at the university. It goes all the way down to Cooperdine. Most people are not even aware that valley is there. But if you drive up Wimborne High Street and you go down the little dip and up the next one, you think, oh, I've gone through a dip. No, you haven't. You've actually driven across a valley that goes all the way from the university down to Cooperdine. That's probably not of great interest locally, but what we've also got is another valley here. I think that's Haworth Road. Valleys here, which come down and down through, and that's where Kinson Village is. That's roughly where we're sitting there. We're sitting at the bottom of quite a big old valley system that most people are probably not even aware of until you actually start thinking about it. So, all these valleys, what would you normally expect to see in them? You'd normally expect to see streams. If you actually go and look at where all the streams are in Bournemouth, there's actually a distinct lack of streams. The only streams, we've got a little bit of stream up here in Fern Heath, we've got a little bit of Kinson Stream down here, you've got the Bourne Stream, and then there's a little bit of a stream running through Queen's Park, which doesn't even run all the time anyway, it only runs there. So, that seems odd. We've got all these valleys and virtually no streams. So what's happened to them? Well, first thing we did was do some research on the old historical information. And if you look on the old OS maps, these are all the streams that were in the Bournemouth area at one time. Hey, look what we've got up here. Kinson Stream used to go all the way down to roughly New Road, and past New Road, and down under roughly Whiteleg Way, and it used to come out in the main river down there. There was another branch that goes off where it goes at the moment. That stream ran all the way up here. There was another stream coming down through here. Another stream, we think, up in Redhill. Well, that's a bit difficult because the ground in Bournemouth actually drains very well. We actually have very good drainage, and what we think an awful lot of these streams were what were called winterbournes, which means they were probably only there in the winter. So, this is all the streams historically of Bournemouth, and North Bourne area was had quite a few streams on it. So where have they all gone? Well, that's just a detail of the North Bourne. You can see where all those streams used to run in the North Bourne area. Where have they all gone? Well, the answer is they've all ended up now in pipes under the ground. These are now the main surface water sewers which cover this area. So we have one area here, this green area. It goes all the way from Wallace Down Road, all the way down through Haworth Road, Leybourne Avenue, down here, and it ends up at the river down by New Road. So you can see that all these streams are now under the ground in pipes. The other thing that we're trying to think is what else other information we've got. Now we've got on maps that show us where is grass, where is paved and all that. So we've got all that sort of information. So let's get a computer in. Computers, great things. Yeah, let's analyse it. I wonder how you actually analyse these things. Well, what they do is they actually divide the whole place up in a grid. Why is this important? At the moment, it's all designed on, the previous data was done on a 5-metre grid. Why is that important? We've divided the whole of Bournemouth up into 5-metre squares. Why is 5 metres important? Well, if it's smaller than 5 metres, it doesn't actually get included in the model. We're looking globally across the whole of the catchment. So, 5 metres. Garden walls. Garden walls are smaller than 5 metres. So, things like garden walls are not included in the model. But a garden wall can make a huge difference to where water flows. But we're trying to look broad scale at this time, not looking at it in detail. So, taking that all, first information that came out, this was produced by the Environment Agency and it was given to us in 2008. And guess what? All those valleys are all predicted to have surface water flooding in them. Now, you look at that. Oh, that's horrendous. What you've got to bear in mind is that is a 1 in 200 year event. We'll come on to what 1 in 200 year means in a minute or so. But we've never seen a storm like that in Bournemouth. And the other thing is, it assumes that the rain covers everywhere at once. Now we know, looking at the air show event, looking at the recent 3rd of July, the rainfall tends not to come along in huge big dollops like that covers the whole catchment. It's very localised. The air show event, the whole of the main part of the rainfall was only 3 kilometres across. That was the intense area of it. The only trouble was, it came across here and then tracked up through this area of Winton and Charminster. It was very localised, but it caused severe flooding on the route of it. The 3rd of July event actually came mostly up through Poole and tracked roughly through there. So that 3rd of July event did hit North Bourne. So, as soon as you have a map and a GIS layer, you can start doing all sorts of wonderful things with it. And what national government did, was the first thing they did, was they started looking at the number of properties they thought were at risk of surface water flooding. And to be honest with you, the figures were quite scary. National government really did start worrying. This is the table, and you can see, perhaps unsurprisingly, top of the list, City of Westminster. 31,600 properties at risk. This list is over 2,000 long. What have we got? Number 74, Bournemouth. Now, at this stage, national government was suggesting that there was 4,100 properties at risk of internal flooding in Bournemouth. And they awarded us some money. They actually drew the line across at 4,000. So we were right on the bottom of it. So we were awarded some money to try and look at this in more detail. So we employed our consultants to look at it. Just briefly, the Environment Agency also provided figures to national government, and they came to the conclusion that there's over 5 billion properties at risk of flooding nationally. So it's a big problem. First law of computers, I don't know if anybody deals with computers, rubbish in is rubbish out. So, what we decided we'd like to try and do is compare what these computer models are telling us with what we know occurs. Now, we've been keeping information on where floods over the last couple of years, and these are all the reported flooding that we've had in Bournemouth. Now, this is not necessarily houses flooding, this could be roads, it could be whatever. And you look at that map and you think, oh, blimey, it's everywhere, and it's just random, it doesn't seem to make sense, does it? But when you take that information and then you overlay the predicted surface water flooding, you start seeing that patterns are emerging. The flooding does occur where it's predicted. That's using the original EA data. We then went on, I'll just very briefly touch on when we say to somebody, oh, that was a 1 in 50 year event, everybody says to me, well, we had one last year. We had one the year before. I can only go by the national statistics that were given. These were produced many years ago for the flood studies report, and basically what they do is they say how much rain you have in a certain time, that's the volume, and from that you can work out the return period. Those are the figures that we use. I also am starting to query some of these things because we seem to be getting these far more often than the statistics would suggest. Now, whether that's something unique to Bournemouth, we don't know, but we are actually starting work with Wessex Water and the Met Office to start looking at something whether Bournemouth actually has a particular problem. But nationally, these are the statistics. So when we say that was a 1 in 100 year event, that's based on national rainfall data. Okay, moving very swiftly on, that's a design storm. Unfortunately, real rain doesn't come along in nice, neat packages. It comes along like that, which makes it actually very difficult to work out exactly what the return period is. We've installed some rain gauges in Bournemouth so we know how much it does rain. We've actually got 4 rain gauges dotted around the borough, and it's amazing how much sometimes they vary. We've had it before now that it rains up in North Bourne, it's bone dry down in South Bourne. I'm sure most of you will say, well, we all knew that. Yeah, but we now have the proof of that. And we have that rain information which allows us to see what the actual storms really are. So, this is the current surface water models that we are using for planning issues. What happens is that now, every new planning application we get is plotted against that information. And if there is a risk of flooding on that new development, the planners send it up to us to consider. But what we are not doing, when we then speak to the developer and says this site's at risk of flooding, his first reaction is, oh, they're saying I can't develop it. No, what we're saying is that you need to consider that at some stage that site is going to flood. So, build the building a bit higher. The cost of building a building a foot higher, when you're building it, is nothing. The cost of trying to raise a building up a foot after it's flooded and it's built is horrendous. So, that's one thing we are doing, is using this surface water mapping to look at new development. So, hopefully, it's not going to get any worse. But we are not saying that gardens are not going to flood. We are most interested in internal property flooding. That's what really does affect people. Gardens recover. I know your garden might all be covered with mud, plant pots all over the place, but gardens will recover. People's houses take months and years sometimes to dry out after they've flooded. Our main concern is internal property flooding. That's the one in 10 year, that's the one in 30, one in 200. Just briefly, if I say 1 in 200, and we had one last year, when are we going to get the next one? Any ideas?
It could be next year, couldn't it?
Exactly. It could be next year, it could be the year after, it could be in 50 years, it could be in 200 years. This is something that an awful lot of people don't understand. If you say 1 in 200, they think, oh, that's great. Not going to have one for 200 years. Or, oh, it's 200 years till the next one. It doesn't work like that. As the gentleman said, you might well get one tomorrow. So, it's very difficult. Engineers, we talk about these things all the time, and we sort of know what we mean, but it's very difficult to convey that to the public. The EA don't even talk about return periods anymore. They talk about annual probabilities. So if I would say to you, an annual probability of 0.01, ooh, I wonder what that, or an annual probability of 1%. It has no, people can't visualise that. We talk about a 1 in 100 year event. Oh, 100 years, that's a long period of time. So at least, but it's not a good way of talking about it, but it's the best way we've got. Well, I think it is anyway, I don't know what other people think. Anyway, very quickly, moving on. How good's the modelling we've got? This is the town centre. That's the predicted flooding. Well, we've all seen gardens flooded, so yeah, that's good, yeah, the model's predicting that. Oh, that's Brady Road, I don't know if people have seen that before. That's further up in Bravely Road. That's actually the main surface water sewer running up all over the place, but there was water all running down through Merrick Park. That's the entrance into the Town Hall extension car park with all the flood water going into the Town Hall car park. So we suffer as well. The other thing is, once you've got maps and you start counting properties, the other thing you can start doing then is looking at where your highest risk areas are. There's lots of ways of looking at this. But these are the ones based on estimated annual damage. And you know that big valley I was talking about that came all the way down from Wallace down at the university all the way down to Cooperdene? That is the area that's predicted to have the most severe, most costly flooding in Bournemouth, although there are other patches as well, but that's the biggest single area. You can do it on annual damage, you can do it on the number of properties, you can add them up in squares, whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. We are able to identify the highest risk areas in Bournemouth now. And yes, there are a couple of patches in North Bournemouth. Climate change. You all heard about it. What's the impact of climate change likely to be on flooding? Well, the predictions is that winter rainfall is going to get heavier. Now, winter rainfall, by and large, apart from, I know there's a big argument about leaves and all that thing, but just from a capacity point of view, winter storms tend to go on for a long time, but they're not incredibly intense. What our big problem is those summer thunderstorms, those very intense, localized thunderstorms. And the prediction is that as it gets hotter in the summer's going to be drier overall, but because it's hotter, you get more intense thunderstorms. And that is going to be our biggest problem, is coping with those very intense localized thunderstorms. A lot of people say that it's happening already. I've got people who are saying to me, oh, well, the weather's changed in the last 4 or 5 years. We seem to be getting a lot more of these very intense storms. That might well be the case. But certainly that is the prediction of climate change. That's what's likely to occur. So, what can we do? Because let's be honest, at the end of the day, most people are not worried about all the technical detail. They want to know, what are we going to do about it? These are some of the options that are available to us. We can build bigger sewers, drains, dig up all the roads, huge cost. Yes, can be done. Where's the money coming from it? The other thing to bear in mind is that the sewers are the responsibility of Wessex Water. Now, I'm not doing that as it's not council's problem, it's all Wessex Water's. Because at the end of the day, you pay your water rates or water charges. Somebody has got to pay for all of this. Store water on the surface, ponds or big underground tanks. Identify areas for water to go. Mr. West will remind me again of the government report of about 2005 entitled Making Space for Water. The water's got to go somewhere. And the more intense rain that we have, it's got to go somewhere. You can't dig a hole and bury it in the ground. There's just too much of it. It's going to be flowing across the ground. What are we doing?
This is fascinating, but this is a food. It's a food. In other words, there should be the opportunity to speak.
Right, well, I'm just about...
I would encourage you to engage with the residents who come here especially on this subject.
I'm just about...
Because we're running out of time, Roger, can you please leave it to the end? I'm going to have to speed it up a bit because we've got still lots on the agenda. Thank you.
Just going to do, just about finished, sustainable urban drainage systems. We're now insisting on all new properties employ sustainable urban drainage. That means they've got to make soakways. They've got to cope with the water on their own bit of the site. So new developments should not make the situation worse. Property level protection. There are things that can be done to protect houses. You can get new boards that fit indoors. You can get devices that block the air bricks when it floods, little things that float up. So there are things that can be done to protect property. Oops. This is just a quote. I think the thing to realise is this is not just a Bournemouth problem. This is a problem that we've got in many urban areas. And even many years ago, they were identifying that urban drainage is a problem. The things have evolved over the best part of 100 years. It's not going to be solved overnight. Thank you. I'm sorry that's a bit depressing, but it's better to be realistic. I could come on and say, yeah, we're going to solve all the flooding problems. We're not.